Hello, and welcome to the Handplane Challenge. I'm Mark, your host, and I'm the guy who likes to identify pluses and minuses in the design of antique handplanes. One of my motivations for the Handplane Challenge video series is that I feel that a lot of people can save money by buying an antique handplane relative to a brand new one. For example, an old Stanley Bailey No. 4 can be had for much less money than an equivalent plane from a current manufacturer. However, not all antique handplanes are created equal, and so one of the ideas behind this video series is that if you watch these videos, you can tell which antique handplanes are good and which ones are not so good. At any rate, for today's video, I'm going to demonstrate sharpening a plane blade. This will be the process that I use to sharpen the plane blades used in the Handplane Challenge, but it's also the procedure that I use all the time for any of my planes, and so it should be generically useful for everybody. Now, some qualifications are in order. I'm going to be demonstrating sharpening a plane blade, not chisels, for example, on a beveled, that would be used in a beveled down hand plane, and I'm going to be using the hollow grind method and water stones. There are many different ways to sharpen plane blades, probably all just as good, but this is the procedure that I use, that I'm familiar with, and that I get good results with. So, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so here's the order of events. First, we're going to talk about prep work. How do we get ready to sharpen the plane blades? Then we're going to talk a little bit about theory. Not very much, just a little. Then we're going to work on flattening the back of the plane blade. We'll understand more about that in a little bit. Then we're going to do the bevel. Then we'll try it out, and then we'll recap what we have learned. Alrighty then, so the first thing in the prep work, job number one, is to cover up your bench. For those of us that use water stones, at least. Water stones work great, I love them, that's what I use, but they are a mess. And so for those of us like myself, I don't have one single dedicated sharpening station, and so I often use the top of my bench, and water stones are very messy, so you want to cover it up. I use a blanket. An old blanket. So the blanket has taken the brunt of the dirt and saves my bench top from getting wrecked. Okay, continuing with the prep work, let's introduce the water stones. Going from coarse to fine, we have an 800 grit king water stone, 1200 grit king water stone, 6000 grit king water stone, and a Sharpening 15,000 grit stone. This has been a recent experiment. I'm still deciding whether I like it or not. I used to stop at the 6,000, but lately I've been trying the 15,000 to see if I get a sharper edge. Okay, the second thing in the prep work, the water stones, before you ever start doing anything, you need to go ahead and flatten your water stones. And you're going to have to flatten them throughout the process. So it's good to have a system set up that makes it easy to do that. Now, I used to use this diamond plate and sharpen the stones like this, but I decided I didn't like that because this particular diamond plate is basically the same size as the water stone, and so you always have a tendency to go like this, and when you do that you can see that you're spending the middle of the stone is always on the flattening plate, whereas the ends are spending half their time off the flattening plate. And so there's a natural tendency when you use too small of a flattening stone, there's a natural tendency to dish out the middle of this stone. So that's not a good thing. What I do instead is use a piece of float glass, pretty long, mounted to a plywood substrate. Now you can see that when we're flattening something, we got a stroke, and the whole stone is always on the surface of the flattening medium. So I like this a lot better. That's what I'm going to use. All right. Before I ever start, the first thing I do is sharpen the fine stones, because you want to do those if you can while they're still dry. If you try to do it once they're wet, what you will find happening is that they will tend to have suction on the abrasive, so that it literally becomes hard to move them. And so to flatten this, we're going to put a pencil line in here so that we know how that we've done the whole thing. Going to rub it back and forth on the medium. Still some pencil line. I like to do this with a piece of sandpaper that is not so old or not so new, because no matter what sandpaper you use, it's not going to be as fine as the fine stone. Still an area in the middle here. Getting there, almost done. That would probably be good enough. What we're going to do, just a minute here, is clean off this paper and do one last pass on flattening that stone. Okay, we're ready to do this final pass. I went off camera there because one thing I should say is I don't like, certainly you're leaving a lot of water stone dust on the paper, and when I clean it off, I use my dust collector to suck it up, because I think it's not good to breathe most of the dust produced by the sharpening process. So that's why we took a pause there. Now we are almost got a little spot here, right here, that we're going to try to get rid of. so that our stone is perfectly flat. Almost. Good enough. Okay, so all the pencil marks are gone. The surface is pretty much almost a complete uniform color. That's sort of what we're looking for. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and do the other fine stone. Not going to put that on camera, it's just more of the same. So be back in a minute. Okay, moving right along, we're going to do the coarse stones. Now these coarse stones have been soaking in water for a good half hour now. I used to store them in water all the time, but it got to where it was getting pretty scummy when I did that. So now I take them out when I'm not using them and soak them ahead of time. So same procedure, pencil mark. Now the difference here, of course, is that now this guy is wet. And so whatever dryness, if we wanted dry, we're not going to have dry anymore. Now that was, obviously I had already flattened that. That was pretty good. Pretty easy to do. We'll do the 1200 one. Hopefully it's just as flat. And it is. Okay. And I think we're basically about ready to move on to the next step.